All right, good evening, everybody. Normally, I don't do this. Normally, I have videos queued up for at least a week just because I'm constantly working on projects and trying to get various things done, and they just end up stacking up, and I try to get, a couple of videos out a week. But I know that a lot of people have been asking about my testing and trying to figure out the grid dropout issue. So it is Thursday, December 6th. I'm trying to get this recorded tonight because today's the end of my test, and then I'm going to try and get it put out tonight. So let's get started. Over the last week, I've been trying to do more diagnosing and trying to figure out exactly why at random times the grid disconnects, drops down to battery, and then switches back to grid bypass. And at the end of my last video, you saw that I seemed to narrow down the problem to what I thought was MPPT2 on inverter 1. Or PV2 on inverter 1. Because every time I had all four arrays connected, it seemed to be much more prevalent. And when I would go through and disconnect PV2 on inverter 1, everything seemed to work fine for the rest of the day. Well, obviously you can't leave all your arrays disconnected because that kind of defeats the purpose of having solar. So I was trying to still dig in some and figure out exactly why, but it just bothered me that everything worked fine. I worked on battery mode, I worked on grid bypass mode, all up until I hooked up that fourth PV array. And so I started digging into solar resistant a little bit, trying to see, does that reflect any of these issues? Because I know that solar resistant in the graphs and the charts and stuff provides a snapshot. It's like every 10 seconds or so, but you get a fairly decent picture of what's going on. And so I started going back through the history, trying to see, all right, did solar resistant capture any of this? So let's dive in and see a little bit of what I ended up seeing with solar resistant and see if we can make any correlation in what's going on. So as I was trying to figure out what this clicking issue is, and in fact it just did it again, I've been looking at solar resistant to see if I see any patterns, and you can see here two different times where the grid connection dropped. And so you see 1204.50 and 1206.30. So scrolling down, I was just trying to match up, what kind of happened around 1204.50 and 1206.30. So over here you can see a spike in battery power, but not much here. State of charge, you're not going to see anything. 1204.50 MPP voltage. There was a spike in the voltage on inverter 2. For MPP1, and then 1206.30, kind of a spike in both inverters. Over here, 1204.50, nothing much. 1206.30, nothing much. You see the dips in the current. Not on that one. 1204.50. Not really. And 1206.30 coming back up. Power seems right there. It seems normal. I mean, obviously low, but normal. It's at the beginning of the dip, I guess you would say. See, MPP power here, inverter 2 is lower compared to what it was. MPP 1 power, 35 down to 9 on inverter 1, then back up. And again, you see your battery current, because it's switching over to battery, you're seeing the actual battery take over. So these dips all represent that change. Temperature, nothing. Grid voltage. I mean, you see fluctuation, but nothing significant. AC output is going to fluctuate based on the grid voltage, grid frequency. And I guess right there you've got 1/10 of a difference. But then this one here, and I don't know what this is for, but the bus voltage went from 400 volts, can drop to 345. And then it picked back up 403. And then it dropped to 340 over here. So I don't know what the bus voltage is. And actually, let's zoom out to the last 6 hours. So you can see drop, 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 multiple drops here. Especially after, and you'd see little ones here and there, but not very many until after that 10 o'clock range. And there you go, right? You can see where your battery kicked in each time. So let's come down here and look at the bus voltage, and the bus voltage drops every time that it switches over to battery. So is it something relating to the bus voltage that's causing the switch, or is the bus voltage change just a result of the switch? I'm not sure. I mean, you can see that it's slowly increasing. This morning it was a lot higher. And even overnight it was, but again, I don't know what the bus voltage actually is. But yeah, there's a drop there. So you can see that it's dropping multiple times. Let's see if I can. So yeah, there's the ones that we were just looking at. 1204.50, and 1206.20 and 30. But even still, some of these little ones, I guess it might not reflect, because this is showing what, 10-minute or 10-second increments, so it might not reflect in here. It just might have to hit at the exact right time. But it's just very puzzling. There's a difference in voltage. And again, is it because the voltage difference is so great that it's causing it to drop? Doesn't seem like it. I don't know. Just thinking out loud again. It's very interesting to see that the voltage spikes. I don't know what correlates to the spikes, but I mean, that is within that range of when the disconnect is happening. I don't know. So I know that was a lot more analytical, diagnosing, troubleshooting than probably a lot of you really wanted to go through. But it just kind of shows a little bit more, like my last video, just my diagnosing process of trying to figure out what exactly is going on and see if I can say, when A happens, B happens as well. See if I can make any connections. Now, I can't actually say, oh, the PV spikes here are causing the grid to drop out, because when the grid switches, or when the inverters switch from grid mode, well, when they switch modes, period, I believe, the PV seems to disconnect, the modes switch, and then PV reconnects. At least that's been my experience. Anytime I go through and try and change a mode on my inverter, it seems to disconnect PV and reconnect. So I can't tell you that those spikes that we saw actually were causing the grid to disconnect. Those just may be a result. Same thing with that bus voltage. The bus voltage dropped. I can't say that that was causing the problem. That could be a result of the disconnect. But I just thought it was interesting that you could kind of follow this pattern down. And you could see, all right, at this time, the grid disconnected, battery voltage jumped up because that had to pick up the load. And then you can follow it down and just see these different changes across all these different areas. And I'll tell you, over the last week and a half, really, I have had multiple days of complete nastiness. I have had multiple days of sun. So I've had all different ranges, and I started to see this pattern of when this disconnect would happen, when I had all 4 arrays hooked up, it seemed like all the voltages of my arrays were all floating around that 90 volts, which I believe is that minimum voltage that the MPPTs need to ramp up and start producing power. And they were all floating around that 90 volt range. And so I was trying to figure out, well, does that have something to do with it? You know, or is it struggling because there's so little voltage across all the arrays? I don't know. From that standpoint, I couldn't, again, definitively say yes or no. It just seemed interesting that multiple times that this disconnect happened, that voltages were around the minimum requirements. So, what did I do about it? Well, I spent multiple days trying to disconnect this array and that array and let it run for a long time and just see, okay, if I disconnect array number 1 on inverter 1, do I still have the problems? Yes, I did. If I disconnect array number 2 on inverter 1, do I still have the problems? No. If I disconnect array number 1 on inverter 2, do I still have the problems? Yes. If I disconnect array number 2 on inverter 2, do I still have the problems? No. So again, still didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I would have assumed that any time I removed one array, because it would drop me back down to that 3 arrays I had before, that it would stop happening. But it didn't. It only seemed to happen when I disconnected one of the PV2 arrays. So I thought, all right, if removing one of the PV connections from PV2 on either inverter seems to fix the problem, that's nice. At least, you know, I know that I can stop it from happening. I can stop my lights in my house from flickering every 5 to 20 seconds, because that's what it was doing. I mean, when your wife's up in the kitchen baking during the day, and then she starts talking about how these lights keep blinking, it's not good. So how did I make this work? How am I going to make this work? Well, let's go take a look. The way I made it work was I pulled out one of my old MPPT charge controllers. So PV2 from inverter 2 is disconnected, and please ignore the wiring. I'm working on fixing it. And this PVC conduit is all temporary. It's just to give me a feed down. It's all going to get swapped over to EMT. But anyways, so I ended up taking this array, which is my smallest array. This is the, what is this? All of my 100 watt panels. So it's actually 2 600 watt arrays in parallel. Around 120 volts open circuit, I believe. So I ended up taking this array and bringing it down and pumping it into my Victron charge controller so I can still utilize the array. I'm still getting the power off of that array, but it's not going through these inverters up here. And I did this last Thursday, probably around 9:30 in the morning. And like I said earlier, I have had multiple days of nasty, and I have had multiple days of sun, and I have not had the grid drop out on me once. So it seems like it's a viable workaround for me. It's not ideal. Not ideal in the least bit, because my solar assistant can't track the data on the Victron charge controller. So I'm losing information from my array. Victron has some of that data, but it doesn't tie in. So it's making me have to look in 2 places for my PV information if I want to see all of it. So it's not ideal in the least bit, but it does seem to work. So I know I've heard multiple instances of different people with different style inverters, from the MPPs to the EG4s to the Sun Gold Power, all having similar experiences, which leads me to believe that this is actually a problem in the base inverter itself. But at least I figured out a way to make it work. So this is all going off the assumption that removing one of my 2 PV2 arrays off of my inverters is fixing whatever the issue is. I can't say for sure that it's going to be that way with everybody else. I can't say, I still don't really know what the problem is. And I really wish that I did, because then I could actually explain why this is working. Because I still don't know. But for me at least, removing that PV connection and pumping it into a different charge controller, which is completely separate from the other two inverters, it seems to resolve the problem of the inverters when in grid bypass mode dropping down into battery. And I will note that because of limited solar, even having the couple of sunny days that I've had, I've been in grid bypass mode the entire week. So this hasn't been one of those tests to where, you know, only a couple of days I'm in grid bypass mode, the other couple of days I'm in battery mode, and oh yeah, I haven't experienced the issue. No. I've been in grid bypass mode the entire week. So if this would have happened again, I would have noticed. I would have seen continuous flickering from the various lights throughout the house. And in my office, this light over to my left drives me up the wall when it sits there and it blinks. And that's what it was doing all the time before I made this change. So I know it's not ideal. I know it's not a fix, but it is a workaround. It works okay for me right now. It might not for you guys, because it might mean that, well, if you wanted to test this, you need to go out and buy another charge controller. I already had extra ones from my 12-volt system laying around, so that's why it's okay for me right now. And if something changes, I'll let you know. I kind of want to let this ride to see if it does resolve the issue. Now, unfortunately, because I only have the one setup, the one set of inverters that's having this problem, I don't have a way to, you know, have one bank of inverters with all 4 PV connections and another bank of inverters with only 3 PV connections and this separate charge controller. I don't have any way to test any of that stuff. I wish I did, just because it would really help me have a side-by-side comparison of the issue. But I don't. So I can only try disconnecting this, turning off that on this one environment, and let it ride and see, does the issue come back? I know this has been another long ramble, especially going through even some of the solar resistant stuff, but I wanted to let you guys know at the end of my test what I had seen and the potential workaround for what I have seen. I wish I had an answer that, oh yeah, change this setting and it fixes the issue. Or, oh, this wiring just needs to get, you know, tightened down right here and that's going to fix your issue. I don't. And I'm sorry for that. This is what I've got for right now. So I guess for those of you that are experiencing the same issue, if you have a separate charge controller, and from the few of you that I've heard from, it seems like you guys all had 4 arrays hooked up, 2 to each inverter as well, at least from what I can recall. So if you've got a separate charge controller, I would be very curious to see if you have the same results that I have. Can you disconnect one of your PV2 arrays and run it through that separate charge controller, isolating it from your system? And do you have the same results that I do, to where the disconnect stops? I'd be very curious to know. I really don't want people having to sit there and turning off one of their PV arrays and letting it ride for a week, because you're losing power. And probably like the majority of you, we're all in winter and we have significantly less solar. So we need all we can get. All right, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let you go. I'm going to try and get this all edited so that I can get it out tonight, so that you guys can see my findings. So with that, Y'all stay safe, stay warm, enjoy this, well, for me, it's more of a muddy wonderland. It's not a winter weather wonderland yet. Y'all have a great night, and we'll catch up with you later.